this whole workshop and the change in format from in-person to online has made all of this whole week an experience and an experiment. And so we'll just see how this goes. What I am envisioning right now, and through this next hour and a half, is actually us as a group to kind of think through some of these relationships of cavers, scientists, resource managers, and I know a lot of us wear all of those hats or multiple of those hats in different periods. So I think this is going to be pretty fun. But I think that where I'd like to go with this is kind of a discussion of, where we are, how these relationships have worked, where we want to go in the future to improve and our understanding of cave and karst and our management of cave and karst through using cavers, and then start talking about how do we get there. So just to get us all on the same page with kind of the general format that I'm hoping for, I asked you all to be able to give a couple minutes of discussion of your view of these relationships. Ultimately, what I'm vaguely framing this as is a SWOT analysis, which for those of you that aren't familiar with it, this is kind of the general format of it here. So we have, we do an assessment of kind of strengths, weaknesses, and future opportunities, and within the lens of how do we get to where we want to go. And so we're not going to really deal with threats. I'm not even sure we're going to be able to get through to kind of looking at how do we build this into the future, but I figured we would give it a go, see how far we get. And ultimately what I'd like to do is have this be this conversation be the foundation for some sort of document that kind of lays out how these relationships work and ways that cavers, scientists, resource managers can work together to improve our understanding and our protection of caves. So that's kind of generally where I'm hoping to go today. Like I said, with the format, with everything else, this is going to be a little bit of an experiment. So let's see how it goes. Now, along those lines, really, like I said, there's kind of 4 main questions that I am hoping we can answer is, how do we interact? Where do we want to be? What's our future goal? What are some of the strengths of how cavers, scientists, and managers work together now? And what are some of the challenges that exist that we can improve on? So that's kind of the quick, I hope that we can get here, overview of our workshop today. And really where we go is going to depend on all of us and where our discussions go. So I'm pretty excited. Thank you all for participating and being willing to voice your ideas about where we are and where we're going. So real quick, I think I know most folks on the call in some form or another. I've figured I'd just quick introduce myself. So I've been caving for about 20 years, and it was through caving that I got into science and resource management in cave and karst. I have worked as a cave resource manager in the National Park Service here in the United States. And I currently work as a research scientist at the Kentucky Geological Survey at the University of Kentucky. And all of that is kind of cave and karst related. That's pretty much what I do these days. And so my general 2 cents on how me as a caver, me as a scientist, and me as a resource manager has interacted with the other 2 of these, it kind of boils down to 4 main things. Baseline cave survey, which provides some good baseline information. Resource inventory, assisting with data collection, helping with resource monitoring. And in general, cavers are really good at coming forward and being like, hey, there was this thing I saw in a cave that I think you might be interested in. And that's kind of, in a nutshell, how I see some of this, but I'm really excited to see what all of you have for your thoughts of these interactions. And so just a little on the format going forward. I know that a handful of folks sent out some slides, which is great. And I think Autumn set it up so that you should be able to share your screen and we can see your slides. If you have trouble with that, Autumn or I can share our screens with your slides and walk through it. And so, as I mentioned in the email, my hope is that you each have about 2 minutes to talk about kind of what your thoughts are on some of those questions. And then we'll have a minute or two for questions and then kind of move on to the next person. As we go through this, if you do have questions, if you could type them into the chat, or at least make a note in the chat that you want to ask a question. That way, Autumn and I can kind of keep an eye on that and kind of keep it organized as we go through that part of this. And then once we get through everyone kind of talking about, you know, their thoughts on these relationships, I think, Autumn, real quick, will it be easy once everyone has shared their slides, if they have them, to remove them as co-hosts?
Yeah, that's
okay.
Just a click for me, so.
Cool, I think that's gonna be the easiest thing for us to do, because then as we go through kind of discussing those strengths and weaknesses and kind of future directions, I think the easiest way to have the conversation flow is for people to raise their hand when they want to make a comment or ask a question or whatever. So I think that's the way we'll go, but we'll kind of play that by ear too if people are having trouble with that. And I know, since it looks like we have at least 2 folks on the phone, that might be some challenge. There might be some challenge there. But we'll see what we can do. So with that, see, I know it looks like we got Rachel is on the phone. Who's the other person that's on the phone?
That may be George. I did suggest he try it that way. And I see that Stan Sides has also noted that if you're using a Mac, to enter the 745 password first, and then you'll be prompted to enter 270270. So maybe Mac specific an issue here.
Yeah. All right, well, I think to get started here then, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen. And I mean, based on my list, I'm going to just kind of go down the list. Art and Peggy, you guys are first on the list if you want to share your screen. And
Okay, how do we get to share our screen?
So, Peg, you'll want to go down to the bottom toolbar, and you'll see an icon that says share screen.
Right, and I
Uh-huh.
see you, but I don't see us.
So if you select the screen option, that will be sharing whatever you're viewing
Okay.
on your screen. So you might just navigate to your document, and you should be able to show us what you've got.
Do you see that? A whiteboard, iPhone,
Whiteboard, iPhone.
post attendees, citizen science, maybe?
So perhaps the first option on the top
Right, that's you.
left.
That's you.
Yeah, so we see you.
Okay, we can see your screen and what you're doing now, it looks like. Mm-hmm.
But then what? Uh-huh. Well, why don't you just say,
Okay.
Can you see art?
Yeah, we can see you still.
Yeah. That's probably
That's all you need. Okay,
a
go
good
for it.
enough view. Do you have the 2 slides that I sent you?
Yep, I'm gonna stop you from sharing your screen real quick,
Good.
and I'll put your PowerPoint up.
There are only 2 slides, that's it.
Mm-hmm. Yep, just give me 1 second here. All right, let's see if I can get this on here. And
There you are.
all right, let me try that again. All right, thank you all for bearing with us here. All right.
Yeah, okay,
Go for
great. I'm not sure how we fit into this. I think we're more of the citizens than the scientists in this case. We're not paleontologists, but both of these examples relate to paleontology. We've done many years of fieldwork in the Mammoth Cave area, and we're still learning. A lot of our fieldwork is assisted by non-geologist cavers, and we all learn from each other. Recently, a big goal has been how the cave relates to glacial events and so forth. Yesterday, we gave a Zoom session that covered those topics. But along the way, we interface with professionals in various other fields. We have 2 examples here that involve paleo. We know our way around the field, but in these examples, we're really the citizens. About 30 years ago, Garland Dever of the Kentucky Geological Survey was showing us some key fossils that are helpful to map the geology in the Mammoth Cave area. We were with him down in the historic route, and near Mammoth Dome, he was pleased to find a fossil coral, Syringopora, he called it, or Syringopora, which he was using as an index fossil for correlating the different beds across the region on the surface. But he was having some trouble. I piped up and said, oh, it also shows up in a bed about 30 feet higher in the next level above. Garland went silent for a moment. He gave a wry smile and said, after all these years, the fossils have turned against me. We all laughed, recognizing how often that happens in all fields. And this photo shows an example from the upper zone. Garland passed away a few years ago, and we miss him dearly. That's kind of the story on interfacing between professionals and nincompoops.
Next slide.
Next slide, please. Another kind of triple interface here. We were asked by a caver to go look at a site where there are chert nodules sticking out of the wall. And we said, sure, that sounds fine with us. And so we accompanied him to a place in Flint Ridge, deep inside the cave. And there were indeed some pretty nice chert nodules, but near nodules, and out of reach to us were these things sticking out of the wall. They seemed not to be chert nodules by any stretch of the imagination, and so they looked like bones to us, but they were scattered and out of reach. And so it turns out that in the meantime, the shark fossil is found in Mammoth Cave. We were in conversation with Vince Vantucci from the survey, or actually from the Park Service paleontology group, to help identify its stratigraphic position. Well, we were able to pin down the stratigraphic position for the shark. It turns out that this is about at the same level. We're not exactly sure to the nearest centimeter, but it's very close to the shark fossil site. And so here's another example how the interface between professionals like Vince and Garland and we who know very little about fossils have interfaced. That's not exactly what you had in mind, but that's our contribution.
No, that's perfect. Thank you. All right. Yeah, thanks, Art and Peggy. Definitely appreciate it. Let's see, I think we'll go next on my list here is Isabella Serena Liso. Isabella, you're on mute right now. There we go.
Yes, no, I'm sorry. Can you hear me now? No, I'm just following the meeting. I'm not the speaker.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yep. Okay. I guess we can, Lindsay, you're next on my list here. If you want to just give a quick little insight on your understanding, on your relationship between cavers, science, and resource managers.
Yeah, sure. I don't have slides planned or anything. And apologies for having my video off. My internet connection is much better if I keep the video off. But yeah, I'm Lindsay Rasnick. I'm a graduate student at Indiana University. And I'm working on a couple of projects with the Indiana Geological and Water Survey. So we use a lot of caver collected data. I would say mostly we use the locations of the caves. I work on projects primarily in groundwater and cave and karst settings. So we use a lot of location data to find the sites. And having that stuff up to date is really, really nice to know about access or how we can get to the sites and stuff like that. And then also, of course, just having caver input on what's going on inside the cave, rock types, any kind of rock-water interaction insight they can give. All of that stuff is really useful. So that's mostly what we use it for.
Excellent. That's definitely something I hadn't actually included in my list. The locations are kind of an important part of studying the caves.
Oh yeah, it's great to have those up to date. It's been, because we traipse around a lot of southern Indiana, and so having a pinpoint of where exactly to go is super useful.
Great. Excellent. Does anyone have any questions thus far for Art, Peggy, or Lindsay? See, if not, Mario, do you have the ability to share your screen? I know you had a couple slides.
Yes. I'm trying to share my screen.
Okay.
I hope you can see it. Yes.
Yep.
let's go to this way. Okay. So I just introduced myself in the first couple of slides. I teach at the Earth and Environmental Sciences Department in the Aldo Moro University in Bari, southern Italy. But also it is now more than 20 years that I'm a caver. So this means that I was and I am so lucky to have the opportunity to put together my work and love, the passion for caves and karst. My main interest is on karst speleogenesis and on geological hazards, from sinkholes to floods, landslides in karst. This brought me in 2007 to edit with John Gunn a book on this topic, published by the Geological Society of London. And more recently, a couple of years ago, in the same collection, I have co-edited another book on recent advances in karst research. But of course, living in a country such Italy, hosting a huge amount of cultural and historical heritage, I have interest in cavities realized underground by man. And I have contributed to the organization of international congresses on this issue, like Hypogea, 3 editions so far in Italy, Turkey, and Bulgaria. Coming to the issue of this workshop, of course, doing research in caves, I am interested in all kinds of data coming from the underground. And in most of the cases, we have to rely on data directly taken from cavers. This is an important point I would like to make. In my opinion, very often what really moves research and science is curiosity. So also not specialized people like caver, if curious observer, may be able to carry out observations of great value. And this observation may be much more important than taking wrong data and measurements. This means that we need to make any possible efforts to build a good relationship with cavers and to fully acknowledge the fundamental role they have in collection of data and monitoring. In my opinion, the work of cavers cannot be only on a volunteer basis, but they must be directly involved as much as possible in projects and funds. And in this sense, I think that the cave community is a wonderful example of citizen science. We are doing this since many, many decades, actually. Of course, we need more data, additional data that requires money, such as those for dating speleothems that provide crucial information for understanding the karst history or for monitoring. And this is a sad point, at least in my country, in the part of Italy where I live and work, because too often there is lack of understanding by administrators and land planners about the value of karst and of the natural resources it contains, beginning with karst aquifers. And also, too often we work in emergency rather than for prevention or for basic research studies. So I think that there is much work to do in this direction to involve and to let understand our politicians the importance of the issue that we are dealing with in caves. That's all for me. I will be happy to ask any question or to listen to your comments. Thank you, Ben.
Thanks, Mario. That's definitely some great points there. Does anyone have any questions, comments you'd like to ask Mario about? If not, I mean, I think you brought up a really important point there that I think for a lot of us that are, you know, cavers and scientists, that kind of drove us into this world is that whole curiosity. That's really what drives us. And I think cavers are inherently curious about everything that we see underground. And I think that ties into a lot of what Art was showing in his talk as well. Those fossils are fascinating, and it's just finding the right people to really understand what they are. Great. Pat, since you chimed in the group chat, did you want to tell your story or your report?
Sure. So I'm going to tell this from the perspective of a caver who's made some observations and somebody picked up on it. And so in the early days of that crazy cave in New Mexico called Lechuguilla, one of the survey trips that I went on, we were looking for a deep point in the cave, and at that time we found it. And we noted that it was really weird down there, that we thought we could smell sulfur. And we also found these weird white things. We didn't know what they were. Later we found out they were folia, but at the time we didn't know that. And so in addition to our survey notes, we also wrote up our observations just as a general course of action. Well, another caver who was participating more as a scientist, his name was Kim Cunningham, and he worked for the USGS. And basically, let me turn off my sound here. This thing is crazy. And so he read my account, and he asked if I would be willing to go back to the same area again and collect that white stuff that I saw. And so he got permission from the Park Service, and we went back and collected a little piece of folia, and we didn't really smell any sulfur anymore. So, we made that observation as well. Well, when Kim analyzed this little piece of folia, what he saw in it, and I guess I should back up just a second. At that time, when people were first starting doing studies in Lechuguilla, they were looking at the water. And what they determined, what they were looking for, was that there was nothing living in the water, that the cave was sterile. That's kind of the general consensus at the time. Once you got past the rift, there was like nothing there. And so Kim looked at this sample with an electron microscopy, and what he saw, he called me and he was really excited, and he's like, I think I see organic stuff in there. I think that maybe it's bacterial. Which at the time was kind of outrageous because nobody had ever thought of that before. And so that was kind of like the beginning of the whole idea of the interaction of microbes with rocks and their significance. And so by a caver making an observation, passing it on to a cave scientist, that was an opportunity for discovery, I guess you could say. Because had we not made that observation, then maybe no one would have ever thought of looking at that little piece of folia that we looked at. And so I think that that just kind of highlights the whole importance of that caver manager scientist interaction and networking. And that's it. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Pat. Does anyone have any questions about that? Cool. Natalia, did you want to speak as well? It looks like you have some similar comments to what Mario was experiencing in Italy.
Natalia, I believe you're on mute. So if you want to respond to us, you'll have to take that off.
Sorry, I'm too shy because my English is too terrible, so I prefer to use the chat.
Okay, yeah, that's no problem at all. So for those that haven't looked at the chat, it sounds like Natalia has seen a lot of kind of issues getting the environmental authorities to understand karst in their regions.
Yes, here in Colombia, karst is a new science. So cavers are only for explore new caves, and we need researchers to make the research of the karst, to understand the karst, and make the laws to protect the karst area, because we have a lot of karst areas here in Colombia.
Cool. Let's see. So just kind of moving down my list here, Will, do you have any thoughts on those questions?
Oh yeah, I didn't bother to make up any PowerPoints, but first place, you know, introduction. I'm Will White. I am Professor Emeritus of Geochemistry at Penn State. I've been involved with research on Karst since I think 1956 is probably the first time I gave a paper on the subject, and just about every aspect of it. So, you know, there's been a lot of stuff in the literature. I would say, as Ben said at the beginning, probably the most useful thing we get from cavers is cave maps. Without cave maps, the rest of it, you can't really do much of anything else. And if you contemplate what it would cost to have paid people to put in the hours that cavers have put in, making the maps that they made, you'd have something approximating the national debt. And so this is just incredibly useful. Most of these maps are in databases, and from a scientific point of view, the important thing is to establish good relations with your local cave survey people, because most of those cave maps and map files are, well, they're proprietary to varying degrees depending on which states you happen to be working in. But a good cooperative arrangement between official cave surveys and whatever kind of research you want to do is pretty important. The other, as Mario and others have just pointed out, is observations. There's cavers down in Lancaster County, eastern Pennsylvania, broke through into a new cave a number of years ago and came back and said, hey, this has got the weirdest stuff in it we've ever seen. You got to come look at it. So we went, we looked, and sure enough, it was also the weirdest stuff I'd ever seen. So wound up doing a major mineralogical study on this paper, and I think this is an important point, the key cavers who made the maps, took the photographs, did the key observations, were also included as co-authors on the paper that we wrote up concerning this cave. So there was another one, and somebody in the caverns of Sonora noticed a kind of funny looking yellow stuff off to one side of the tourist trail, and George Venny arranged to collect a sample of this, brought it back and put a black light on it and lit up a bright green, and I thought, ha, they got a hot one. And sure enough, it's a uranium compound, metatitanoyamanite for those who care, sitting right beside the tourist trail in the caverns of Sonora. Another, right behind the cave maps, comes the idea of providing assistance. I have sent a lot of graduate students off into caves to do some fairly bizarre things over the years, and you can't send the student off into the cave all by him or herself. And so usually there's plenty of willing cavers that say, hey, you know, I got an excuse to go caving. I'll go along and, you know, help set up equipment, or, you know, help take pictures, or whatever it is you need done. That's a terrifically valuable volunteer science by people who are not, most of it at any rate, primarily scientists. And the last point is, for citizen science, and it's been brought up by some of our earlier commenters as well, is this notion of access to caves in order to do the work you have to do, which means establishing relationships with landowners and convincing them that the scientific work you're doing is actually worth doing and worth whatever nuisance you are to the landowner showing up on his property. Even more importantly, our relationships with show cave managers, because one of the great advantages of the show cave is that you can establish a cooperative relationship. You can put equipment in a show cave and nobody's going to mess with it. And that's not always true with other caves. And the same, the show caves along with that are parks, state and national level. And currently, the ability to talk to the appropriate management people in parks and make arrangements to do things is pretty good. It wasn't always that way, but at the present time, it's pretty good. So there are all kinds of things that cavers have done, and I would say that cave science would be nowhere near where it is today if it hadn't have been for the assistance of the caver citizen scientists. Thanks.
Thanks, Will. Definitely appreciate that. And that's, yeah, you kind of highlight some very key pieces of those relationships. So let's see, kind of moving down the list, George. I know you had a couple slides. Did you want to share your screen? Are you able to share your screen now?
Yeah, let me try.
Okay.
It says host disabled attending sharing screen. Okay. How do I make it?
You should be good to go, George. You are now a co-host.
Okay. Ah, there we go. I first apologize for the technical difficulties this morning. I'm not sure what happened. I did everything exactly the same I'd done the last 2 days, but it didn't want to work. There we go. You can see the screen, I assume. Can everyone hear me?
We can hear you, but we're still seeing your video feed instead of your screen.
Okay. How about now?
Yes, we see your screen.
They move these buttons. There we go. Okay. Real briefly, I'm in the Department of Anthropology at University of Kentucky on the faculty there, but my job is primarily administrative, and that's director of the Museum of Anthropology, which is primarily an archaeological museum, collections, research collections, not an exhibit museum. And also part of that is what's called the Office of State Archaeology. And so in every state in the US, someone is designated the state archaeologist, and that's my designation here. And so their responsibility is to keep records of the archaeological sites in the state. And so there are some statutes that actually designate that. It says among these two statutes, one is the Kentucky Antiquities Act. And so among the duties there, it just says you're supposed to report archaeological sites to the Department of Anthropology, meaning the Office of State Archaeology. Now it doesn't say, this means everybody. If you come across an archaeological site on your property, the law says you should report it to us. Of course, the law also doesn't say anything that's going to happen to you if you don't do it. So there's no really teeth in it. They just make that statement. So we keep those records. There's also the Kentucky Antiquity cave law, which also comes underneath my responsibilities as state archaeologist to issue permits so that legitimate people are doing research in caves. Whereas the Antiquities Act only applies to state property, state municipal property. The Kentucky cave law applies to all caves, whether they're on private land or public land. So that's this regulatory position behind that. So as that, we keep a GIS database. It's moved on to GIS now. It used to all be paper-based, obviously. And we have about 28,000 recorded archaeological sites in the state. And of that, 178 are identified as cave sites. And that's what you're seeing here with the stars, the green stars here. And just, if I was sophisticated, I probably could overlay this with the Karst potential map from the KGS, but you'll just have to look at them side by side. But you can see obviously that, you know, what you would expect. There's a lot of caves in Mammoth Cave region. Over here in the inner bluegrass. Didn't mean to do that. Sorry. I guess I clicked the button on the mouse here. Over here in the Pinaral, Eastern Pinaral Karst region. So it's kind of what you'd expect. And not all of these sites, but the majority of these sites are going to be reported by cavers. Or other folks are going to have caves in their property or come across these things. And so we really depend on the cavers, the cave population of folks that are out there in these caves every weekend. I'd love to be out there every weekend looking at caves to identify archaeological sites, but they unfortunately give me too much other work. So we really depend upon cavers to report these sites to us. And I've talked with KGS before about sharing some of that data back and forth. So KGS has a list of all caves. I don't know how many caves we have recorded in Kentucky, but you can see only 178 are identified with as being archaeological sites at the same time. So that's where I fit in.
Awesome. Thanks, George. Yeah, just kind of as a, that 178 number is probably very underrepresentative. I think we have over 5,000 caves in the state right now. Now.
It's 0.5% of known archaeological sites. So it's, I suspect, unless these are kind of fairly recent caves, discovered openings to caves, there's going to be a lot more.
Yeah.
That 168 is going to include cave sites that are just in the entrance area, like we normally think of, like a rock shelter. But it also includes the deep caves as well.
Yeah, that's so, as another kind of perspective on the archaeology, prior to being here in Kentucky, I was at Grand Canyon National Park, and about a quarter of all caves there had some sort of archaeological artifacts within them. And that was
surprised if our number's not more like that.
Yeah. And it just takes, and that's something that I'd like to come back to too eventually, is kind of that takes helping cavers understand what they're looking for.
Yeah, that's part of it. It's just teaching the cavers what kinds of real subtle signs to look for in caves that indicate human activity.
Awesome. Well, thanks, George. So I think moving down the list, Stan Sides, do you mind speaking a little bit about who you are and kind of where you think these relationships are? Oh, you're muted still. No. It says you're unmuted, but I can't hear you right now.
Stan, if you have any prepared materials that you might want to try to share your screen with, we could take that approach. It does say you're unmuted, or perhaps we can get your info through the chat.
Yeah, we still can't hear you, Stan. Another option would be if you can open up the chat and maybe type in there what some of your thoughts are.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks for your patience, everyone. Not sure why this particular meeting is having so many snafus. Technically speaking.
Yeah. While I guess moving on, Sarah Arpin, do you want to speak a little bit about some of your thoughts?
Yeah, for sure. I can do that. I also did not get a PowerPoint together, but I can talk. So I'm Sarah Arvin. I work for the Kentucky Geological Survey at the University of Kentucky. There, I'm a Karst hydrogeologist, and I manage the Kentucky groundwater database. And so I get to work with Karst and cave data a little bit with my job, but really where I get my hands dirty is that I'm involved in the Kentucky Speleological Survey, which is a cave data organization for the state of Kentucky. And so I sit on the board of directors there, and I manage, I chair the data committee. So I take all the information that we can find that cavers generate, and I try to curate all that information, try to integrate it, put everything in one place, preserve that data. And so that's cleaning the data, trying to correct errors as well, trying to, we store it, and then we get data requests. And so I'm one of the people involved in answering those data requests. We get data requests from like the state, if they're doing a construction project, if they're building roads, they'll send a data request to us asking if there are any cave or karst features in their project area that they need to be aware of, because they're required to do things like habitat assessments. And so they want to make sure that they're not being destructive to bat habitat, for example. We also get data requests from researchers, and so and resource managers. And so as far as what cave data we have, I mean, we have maps, we have geospatial data, we have cave locations, let's see, what else? We have publications and things. And so with all this information, we're just trying to get each person interested in it, what they need, I guess. And so even like inventory data, if it's archaeological or biological, if we know that there are some other resources that are in related to that cave, in that cave, we just try to get all that information to the people requesting it so that they can do their studies, do their research. We work with the state nature preserves and let them know what resources are on their sites. And we've been working with them recently, and Ben's done a lot of this with doing biological inventory and monitoring in caves. And so I think I take the big picture sort of view and take all the data that maybe George would be interested in, or a lot of like Stan's work. Stan does a lot of historical accounts and research for the area. And so all those things are valuable bits of information that we try to collect and put in one spot so that we can make it available for those that are interested.
Well, thanks, Sarah. Thanks. Keeping us rolling down the list here. Let's see, Rachel, are you still on the phone?
No, I just kept trying and I'm
Excellent.
here. So yeah, let me share my slides, except been disabled.
Oh. Let's see, you should be good now,
Yeah,
I
you
think.
should be a co-host.
Okay, there, got it. Okay. And put this in presenter mode, maybe. There we go. Okay. So this is me. I'm a geologist and a caver. I've been caving for about 25 years. And my research is mostly focused on karst geomorphology and the processes involved in the evolution of karst landscapes. And so this slide has a lot of words because we had questions to answer. I can kind of boil it down and came to some of the same conclusions that Will shared earlier, which is that one of the most important contributions from cavers to the scientific community is all the cartography that gets done, because you really need that base map to work with when you're doing a study in a cave. And the field assistance provided by cavers is invaluable because you know, it's just not safe to go trucking off miles into a cave by yourself. So you got to have some folks to volunteer to go with you. For the future, I think it would be really great to find better and, you know, happier from both sides kinds of ways to mesh more citizen science with caving. Things like that Esri app that was mentioned this morning that I hadn't heard of before. But yeah, things like phone apps and ways to make sure that people know how they can contribute, and ways for us to know how, as scientists, to know how citizens want to contribute and what questions they want answered, so that, you know, everyone has an ownership of the projects.
Cool. Thanks, Rachel. I'm assuming the data collection app you're talking about, is that the Survey 123?
It is. It is.
Excellent.
And I just learned about it today, but it sounds really cool. I'm going to look into it.
It's definitely something I think has a lot of potential for a lot of stuff we all do working with cavers. All right, let's see, kind of working down. Oh, excellent. Stan, if you have your mic working, if you want to jump in. Oh. Okay. No, sounds like we have the same. Thanks for keeping trying though. Appreciate it. Let's see, Rick Toomey, do you want to jump in?
Sure. This is Rick Toomey. My background is in some ways similar to Ben's, other than I started out as a scientist doing paleontology, and my work in paleontology brought me into caves, and eventually we'll go with turned me into a caver. I kept insisting I wasn't a caver. I was simply a scientist who happened to work in caves, but people stopped believing me when I was 8 hours in through a couple of 1,000-foot belly crawls, etc. And I'm currently cave specialist at Mammoth Cave. Prior to that, I was been cave specialist for Arizona State Parks. But prior to that, I was actually a researcher on the other end at the Illinois State.
Hello.
So, and I completely agree. I'm glad Will and Rachel and others have added to Ben's list, making sure that the support for researchers, because here at Mammoth Cave, we certainly have a lot of researchers who come to work at the cave who are interested in topics that happen to be in the cave, but they themselves aren't cavers. So having people to help get them into those places is absolutely vital. In throwing out the looking at potential issues or weaknesses, I completely also agree with Will and others that the data that cave survey and data and maps are phenomenal and vital to all of the scientific work. However, at times, working with the citizen scientists, the cavers, making sure we can get that data or get those finished products, because a lot of people really enjoy going and doing the survey, but a lot fewer enjoy drawing up the final maps to get those final products. So coming up with ways to work with people to make sure we get all of those products is really important to make sure making sure all of that data gets appropriately archived so it's available and isn't lost, I think are crucial things in trying to deal with some of the citizen science and citizen science data.
Great. Yeah, I think that's a very important point. Thanks, Rick, for that. So I think we have 3 more people that haven't had a chance. Stan, since we've been trying you for a little bit, do you want to give it a go again?
Well, I'm tired of giving it a go. Hey, I get Autumn a thumbs up. No, Ben, I'm a hematologist and medical oncologist by training, but as a teenager, I started going over to Flint Ridge, and in 1962, started caving with Cave Research Foundation. It's a long time to be going back to the same area. And for 30 years, I taught exploration of Mammoth Cave for Western Kentucky University. Initially, Nick Crawford, then Leslie North and Chris Groves and PK. After 30 years, things had changed so much in the way we teach history and can access information over the web. I thought it was time to quit at that point. I'm one of the owners of Diamond Caverns, and being a show cave owner, and also on our property at Mammoth Cave on the edge of the park, having 3 caves, gives you a different perspective. Either way, there's nothing more crucial than citizen cavers and scientists to help. Right now, back in Missouri, my interests here have been very long term. I keep mapping small caves at the contact of the Gasconade Formation and the Roubidou. These are Middle Ordovician limestones. And the other time I'm censusing every several years endangered and threatened aquatic snails in Perry and Northern Cape County. So I sort of bridge that gap between, I think of myself as a caver, but by Mario's description, I guess he might consider me also a citizen, a caver scientist. That's my comment.
Great, thanks, Stan. So let's see, we have 2 more folks that jumped on partway through this. Dave Harmon, do you want to jump in, introduce yourself, and kind of your thoughts on cavers science and resource management?
Oh, hi, everybody. I'm actually just sitting in because I represent the George Wright Society as one of the co-sponsors of this. I'm not a caver. Anyway, so I'm just listening in and trying to get a sense of what's going on in the workshop. So I hope it's going well, and that's all I'm doing. So thanks.
All right, I appreciate you being here. Thank you.
You bet.
Ferdinando, I think you are the last on our list. If you want to give us a quick insight into kind of your role and your thoughts on the cavers science and management relationships.
Let's see, Fernando, I believe you are muted.
All right, it seems like Fernando, you are still muted. If you want to put a comment in the chat, maybe that might be a good way to do it at this point. All right. Well, in interest of time, Fernando, if you do want to put that in there, great. We can kind of come back to your comments. So for everyone at this point, what I'd like to do, I think we've all kind of given some really good insights into this. One thing that I thought I'd kind of bring up again as far as the relationships that Sarah hinted at, but we've kind of talked about, and this is something actually one of the talks earlier this week got me going on, was many of us, and I think in this group it seems that really Stan and George are the two that come from a slightly different background. All the rest of us are coming at caves from more of a geoscience specific interests and focus. Pat mentioned something that I think was really important, the observations about the microbial biology in Lechuguilla that you know, she didn't understand and didn't see, or was able to document, and someone who actually understood it was able to actually interpret what that meant. This is something that I've seen not only with those microbial work, but Sarah mentioned with bioinventories in caves. I've been roped into doing biosurveys now for years, and have definitely done very similar things where looking at macroinvertebrates, you just find something in a cave and point it out to someone who actually knows what they're talking about. And it seems like at this point in time with cave biology, more often than not, it's a new species, which is kind of an exciting part about being a caver and looking at cave biology. So I just wanted to bring up that point again, that as we are thinking about the resources that we have in these caves, there are a variety of things that many of us know nothing about as cavers, that it's great to pull in those resource specialists to kind of understand what it is that we're looking at. So, and I'm trying to pull this up again. So I'm going to do this in a little bit of a weird way. Let's see if this works all right. So I'm going to share my screen again. In interest of time, I'm going to keep this fairly simple. I've tried to kind of distill down, or I'm in the process of distilling down everything that we've been saying, and in kind of my distillation, these seem like the 5 key things that cavers really do to help support the science and resource management. So that kind of knowing where caves are is kind of a big thing. Being able to take people to sites is also a big thing. Developing those maps is a huge, huge piece of this. And then just kind of generally having curiosity and the ability to observe what they're seeing underground provides great foundations. And then beyond that, you know, establishing relationships either with landowners or kind of between cavers and scientists and managers are great ways that people have seen improvements in the science and management of resources. With that, did I miss anything? Is there any other kind of key takeaways that any of you had from the little quick introductions we had there?
I have one other comment. You know, we collect these databases, and Sarah mentioned this too, for use by for researchers. Mm-hmm. But there's another important use of collecting this data, and it's really for conservation of the resources. So people come to my database to look at whenever there's a development project. There's going to be a road project, a dam project, whatever it is, and they're going to look for caves and or archaeological sites. And most archaeologists don't know very much about caves. They wouldn't know a sinkhole if they fell in one. And so they have to be alerted to that there's also underground resources sometimes below where they're surveying. And so that protection that it affords, the more things we have recorded, the more likely we can protect them before it's a done deal on where the highway is going to go. The Transpark's a good example of that. As you remember, when the Transpark blasted into a cave site that turned out to also be an archaeological site.
The other, another thing I would say haven't captured quite here. You may capture it in a later piece, but often the cavers or the caving groups and things have longer institutional knowledge than do the managers. So they can help managers transition between managers and help pass along some of the knowledge that the managers will need to continuing or understand why certain things are managed the way they are or have been in the past.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Ben, this is Mario.
Yeah.
And also linked to this point about knowledge, I would also add probably something about communication, because sometimes the cave word uses different words than in science, and also when we talk about with the resource managers or people living in Karst, we need to adapt our language to let us understand fully. And so there is the need of a common language also. So communication also might be important.
Yeah, very true. I think George mentioned that in the chat as well, that in the English language, karst is definitely a word that's kind of almost exclusively within the scientific realm. I know here in Kentucky, I get lots of calls about sinkholes. And when I use the word karst, I then have to explain what that means and how that sinkhole ties into caves and to groundwater. And those, the general words that the public has don't necessarily match the words that we use within the scientific realm. And yeah, Stan has a very good point. And this, I think, is kind of going into some of the next steps of where to go, is mentoring cavers. I think that's going to be a very important step moving forward. So I think one thing I wanted to jump into from there, unless someone has other key things I missed in this on this slide, I wanted to talk a little bit about how we can improve. What are some of the things that we feel like caver collected data, caver relationships can improve on? Natalia and Mario both kind of mentioned one key one in this kind of helping to guide environmental regulations and helping the cavers and the cave scientists working together to build towards trying to educate people that are actually creating and enforcing regulations. That was kind of one of the points that I noticed on there. Does anyone have any other things here on directions that we'd like to go? I know there was one other, Rachel mentioned kind of improved data data collection kind of via some of these modern apps. Survey 123 is the main one that I have been dealing with, which, for those of you that don't know, it's a phone application that is a ArcGIS has made it, and it allows you to kind of fill out forms that then populate databases. Are there any other, and I know some of the chat is starting to go to some of those next steps that I think are really important to get to where we want to go. But before we get there, are there any other things that you all think that as scientists, as cavers, as resource managers, we want to improve? Like, how can we improve these relationships and the protection of caves through these?
And I would say facilitating communications a little bit better, making sure that the different groups are aware of each other and aware of each other's interests so that, you know, matches can be made better, I guess.
Sarah, did you have a comment to add in there too?
I was going to say pretty much what Rachel said, that really just relationships among nonprofit, government, and private groups, I think, is important. And
Sí, mira, fíjate en el organization chart y a ver la cadena de correos si aparece alguno de las personas que ahí están mencionadas. Y si es posible hablar con el Head of Cooperation para, digamos, hacerle patente de la situación.
Fernando, you're trailing off. I caught some of that, you know, with the communications between heads of groups and cavers. Is that where? All right, I'm having trouble hearing. I think your microphone is fading.
Digamos, ellos le han dicho que en octubre le darían respuesta o que en octubre lo analizarían. Pero digamos, la KPMG, ¿cuándo estaría dando su veredicto?
I'm afraid it's not talking with us, Ben.
Yeah, okay. I'm gonna mute Fernando. I'm gonna mute you again here. Okay.
And by the way, sometimes more than having new regulations, we need to enforce the one that already exists, because in many cases there are good laws and regulations on paper, but there is no real application, implementation of that. So that's another point. At least in Italy, we have in many regions good laws dealing with karst and caves, but then nothing happens in the real world.
Yeah, that's definitely a huge thing. I think one thing that I've dealt with, and I think at least a handful of folks here in the US have dealt with, is we have our National Environmental Policy Act, which when a government agency is going to do something related to caves, they have to put that information out, or when they're doing any land-based activity that may impact the environment, they have to put out for public comment of what they're going to do. And then at that point, it's on cavers to actually respond and raise concerns. And that's definitely something that there's not really a concerted effort, even within the United States, to respond to that, where we have, you know, these laws like you're saying, and I think in Italy you have some very good laws as well, but it's how do we get the caver voice in there to advocate for our needs and for protecting cave resources.
oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to say the Kentucky cave law is a good example of that. Very few people are aware of that law, and it actually protects caves. You can't be dumping into them. You can't be using you shouldn't be using sinkholes to dump stuff into, or burning or destroying formations or cave life. But part of the problem is whoever wrote that law, they define a cave. It's not a cave unless it has a dark zone. So if you can still see the daylight from the cave, they don't consider it a cave. It has to be able to get far enough in that you can't see daylight. So that kind of excludes a sinkhole, which is connected to a cave, and people might be dumping it in there, but if it's plugged up and you can't get through that plug easily, it wouldn't count as a cave. So if you try
and
to
I think that
someone, the lawyers will exploit that weakness in the definition.
I think that speaks to kind of a bigger issue, and I don't know kind of what definitions are in Europe or South America, but I know within the United States, the definition of what a cave is varies from state to state. And so even, in Kentucky, the cave laws say, you know, a dark zone, some states have a length measurement that is kind of, it has to reach that. I know within the US National Forest Service, in order for it to be a cave that they care about, it has to have been designated as significant, which takes cavers or resource managers actually nominating it to be significant. So there's a lot of variability there. And so kind of moving on here, I know we're kind of right at the end of when we were supposed to stop today. And I think we have some pretty good ideas that have gone on in the chat for the last part of what I was hoping for us to discuss here of how do we keep moving forward? How do we improve and kind of address some of these issues? And just kind of summarizing some of the things in the chat here so that we're all kind of on the same page. Let me see here. So some of the things moving forward, I'm struggling to actually go into the chat here, are, so mentoring, Stan mentioned that, and it's definitely a huge part. And I think Rachel made a very good point tied to mentoring. It's not just, you know, cavers mentoring cavers, but it's this interaction between cavers, scientists, and resource managers, and all of us working together. So improving those communications, I think, is going to be key. Does anyone have any thoughts on ways that we can head in that direction? So one of the things that was that, let me see, that George mentioned, the WKU cave courses are definitely a great way to get people involved and kind of train cavers and potentially train scientists and managers. Hopefully things like the talks this week, if they're made available, may provide some good information for all sides of this.
One thing about the cave course, probably, you know, we'd like to increase enrollments in those classes, but it's probably a cost factor. A lot of students have to work during the summers, and it's expensive for them to take classes, but there's ways we can have financial aid or scholarships that they can, for those type of courses, it would be good.
Another thing that I'll throw out there, and I think hopefully most of the folks on here in the US are aware of these, but for those of you that are not in the US, the US's National Speleological Society actually has a pretty good webinar series on cave and karst resources, and those are all, I think, freely available on YouTube, and so that might be a thing for, you know, in, say, Colombia, Natalia, as a way to kind of help inform people about cave and karst resources. And it's something that I definitely use all the time when working with people that aren't familiar with cave in Karst is we have all these videos. Now living in the time of Zoom, it's a great way for people to kind of get at least some baseline information.
I kind of wanted to boost George's point about students being held back by the tuition costs and things like that. And the scholarships are available. For instance, a lot of people's home institutions will cover field course fees. Then, you know, there are scholarships within local departments and stuff like that. But those kinds of opportunities aren't always known about to everybody. And so then that ties in with, you know, something we've been talking about throughout this, and Sarah mentioned explicitly, which is, you know, outreach and making sure that people know what's available to them, because, you know, all these groups want to help each other, but if, you know, if you don't know the help is there, then you can't ask for it.
Yeah, I've had to argue with the administration to accept transfer credits from the WKU courses, because they didn't want to do that at first, because they said, well, it's only a week course. That's not really a class. It's got to be longer than that. And after I had to explain to them that it requires, you know, writing a paper, doing a research project as part of it. It goes on beyond just the 1 week. And they finally accepted it, but.
Well, there's like a an hour, what is it, instructor student requirement at some probably at most universities. And one thing that that's why they didn't initially recognize the week-long course. And I've actually documented how many hours we have done in like some of my courses. And in 6 days, we far exceeded the contact that you would have in a semester, just because they're very intense courses. And so, once again, you know, it's like making people aware of these things, making, you know, administrators or whatever at university or whatever aware that these are, you know, that these count. I mean, it's significant training.
I was impressed by how my classes, which were sort of beginning class, how many middle-aged and older students we had. One retired Park Service superintendent from Vicksburg National Park took my class and really became interested in the history, and thereafter helped us a lot with some of the history of the Mammoth Cave area. So we shouldn't think of them just as college student oriented, at least the more beginning classes.
When the Park Service killed, they used to allow their rangers to take the courses. We always got lots of rangers, but they quit doing that. So that cut, you know, a significant number of people. Universities don't like field classes anymore. At least my university doesn't. They say they don't make money on them. It costs too much. They love online classes. They make a lot of money on those. We don't have a field school at UK anymore because of that cost. When we did have it, we had to subsidize it. We had to get money out of our budget to help pay for that, because the tuition credit wouldn't pay for it. It's a sad state of higher education we live in.
Most definitely. That's kind of some of my thoughts here have also been, you know, how do we step outside of that because of some of those challenges? How do we step outside of that world of higher education to still get some of this information? And I think within the cave world, it's a challenge. Cavers are very curious. I mean, like I said, that's how I got involved in the science, was the caving was so exciting and I just wanted to know about everything that was there. And it's, yeah, how do we, I think these are some great ways to try to get, like Stan said, having, you know, folks that are not your normal college students involved in these classes is a great way to do that. Now, that said, we are, about 10 minutes over our original time. I appreciate everyone hanging in and all of your thoughts. Does anyone have any kind of final thoughts they'd like to throw out there before we end our workshop?
Thanks, Ben.
Yeah, thank you all. And I think this has been really enlightening. I really enjoyed hearing everyone's thoughts on this. I think kind of moving forward, I've had this vision of kind of coming up with some sort of a guide for people to move forward in improving these relationships. And so hopefully I'm going to kind of try to distill down what we talked about into kind of a smaller guide for this. And I'm probably going to throw it out to everyone in this group, and I would love all of your feedback because I think, this is how we're going to make cave science move forward into the future. Is the more we involve cavers and scientists and resource managers together, the more we're going to really understand these amazing spots. So I appreciate it.